Did I hear that correctly, Madam?
No doubt, the hack was concerning.
What does climate change have to do with broadband?
Climate change has to do with everything.
Human resources statement that looks like it was written by a 22-year-old gender studies graduate of Harvard or Yale.
The quote-unquote science of countering social media mis- and disinformation. I'm sure people like Taylor Lorenz will be excited about that.
We do not, NSF does not engage in censorship.
Did you call them out about committing genocide against the Uyghur Muslims?
During fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 22, the NSF funded some 70 grants and 2 contracts, totaling over $45 million, focused on both the quote-unquote science of countering social media mis- and disinformation, as well as the development of digital tools to track and censor so-called mis- or disinformation. One of the projects was called Expert Voices Together, and it is, to quote the NSF, quote, creating a comprehensive system of care that addresses the harms journalists experience due to online harassment. Its mission, incredibly enough, is to, quote, support journalists in moments of crisis while helping the media industry build resilience long-term. In other words, taxpayer-funded therapy for left-wing journalists who find actual facts traumatizing. I'm sure people like Taylor Lorenz will be excited about that. But where on earth in the NSF's mandate is there a justification for these sorts of projects? And do you believe that venturing into such politicized topics undermines broader support for the NSF?
Senator, first of all, let me tell you that the reach, I hope that through the hearing today, you will get to see NSF's broad impact all across our nation through STEM talent development, through economic vibrancy that NSF makes possible, and yes, national security objectives also being fostered. I hope that the examples that I will give you, and in the answer, I'm not trying to package all of that, but I hope that that will come through very clearly. We're doing a lot of work about how to make sure that talent everywhere and innovation everywhere is energized.
Could you answer the question, though, that I asked?
Yes, I'm just going to come to that, Senator, because I just want to make sure that the NSF mission is, I just want to make sure that that is clearly understood also. I want to say one thing very categorically. We do not, NSF does not engage in censorship. We do not regulate any content and engage with anybody who also does so. But what we do is, how do the technologies operate and how are they being used, and provide the public and policymakers the information that they need so that you can make the informed decisions about needed regulations and guardrails, and for the users that they have the tool that they can safely navigate content. That's what NSF is engaged in. That's the kind of projects that we fund. We are not in the business of censorship. We are not in the business of controlling content. I can tell you, for example, even in this conversation that we are having right now, in the deepfake realm, this conversation can be completely altered and presented in a form that you and I will say, how did it even happen? That this conversation that we are having right now has been transformed into something that's even unrecognizable. These kinds of things that happen, we are trying to find how can we build, how can we invest in those projects, and how can we invest in tools and techniques that can help safeguard. And that's all we are doing. We are not censoring. I want to repeat that. We are not altering content.
When you're funding others who are engaged in censorship, you're undermining support for your very important agency.
Senator, maybe I can close with this comment. I'm happy to work with any of you to go through this with you in more of a one-on-one setting and explain what these projects are doing so that it can be helpful. Happy to take your suggestions, happy to take your inputs. NSF, I always say NSF is a learning agency. We learn constantly because we cannot be an agency that says, this is how we do it. We are a learning agency, so happy to take the input and see where, if any, you find that there is, NSF appearing to be, as I have said, we are not, but I'm happy to have the discussion with you.
What are you doing to make certain that we don't have several different agencies that are working on this, but we're not harmonizing that work?
Senator, it was great to be with you and at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, where we announced the Regional Innovation Engine, which I keep talking about. This was focused on transportation, electrification, and digitization. And specifically to your question, we have very tight partnerships with all of the agencies in topical areas that brings us together. For example, we have an MOU with the
So you're
Department of
watching
Energy.
the duplication?
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
That's what I wanted to hear, and I know people in Tennessee wanted to know that.
Thank you. Come again.
What does climate change have to do with broadband?
Climate change has to do with everything. Tell me your exact question.
Well, I'll be happy to. You have climate change requirements, and that the NOFU states eligible entities must account not only for current climate-related risks, but also for how the frequency, severity, and nature of these extreme events may plausibly evolve as our climate continues to change over the coming decades. Can you tell me anywhere though, Madam Secretary, anywhere where Congress has put into law that you would require them to mitigate climate change? Can you point to that section?
Congress requires us to be good stewards of taxpayer money.
That's not my question.
And to be accountable.
Where are you drawing that authority
Therefore, we have to fund projects that will be successful. Otherwise, we'll waste money.
So I understand you might think it's important. I understand Joe Biden might think it's important, but Congress hasn't actually said that's a requirement.
But you want us to fund projects that will be successful. And if climate events prevent success,
How does deploying broadband in Branson, Missouri have anything to do with your climate agenda?
I'll give you a great example. Well, no, but for example, Senator, I talk to people all the time, including in rural places, who tell me that due to climate events, their current technology doesn't work. Like they don't have the internet when there's a storm. So climate very definitely affects the effectiveness of certain technology to provide the internet to people.
Yeah, I can tell you, having just been elected by a state with a large rural population, they're interested in their kids being able to access the internet for homework, okay? They're not interested in your social experiments, okay? So just in the line of Senator Vance's question about, injecting identity politics into your applications, respectfully, how about we just deploy the broadband so people can access the internet?
Think about this from the perspective of a company that is thinking about locating a chip fabrication facility in this country or in China. From China, they get cheap labor, massive subsidies, and a government that seems to want to work with them. From the United States, they get a little bit of money and a human resources statement that looks like it was written by a 22-year-old gender studies graduate of Harvard or Yale, which, let's be honest, it probably was written by a 22-year-old gender studies graduate of Harvard or Yale. Why would you locate your facility in the United States of America when you get a human resources lecture from us, but from China you get a whole lot of money and a whole lot of facilitation for your business? What's the market economy here? Is it the economy that makes it hard to do business or easier to do business? I'm curious, where would you locate the facility given those two separate sets of criteria?
Sir, before I went to China, I talked to about 120 CEOs of U.S. businesses, and they all told me that China is becoming increasingly uninvestable. I think there's no doubt that I would locate my business in the United States.
I agree with you, and I agree these companies should locate their business in the United States, but we have to be careful. The reason that China has become uninvestable is because it's very, very hard to get our money out. But if we make it harder to do business, and if we pass bipartisan legislation that puts money into American manufacturing, and then we make it harder to access it unless you check the diversity box, we're going to be extremely counterproductive.
Secretary, in August, you visited China shortly after it was revealed that the PRC had hacked your email account. And they were privy to all of your emails. In an interview with CNN State of the Union, you argue that you were firm and direct about the hack with the Chinese counterparts. Do you think they viewed your visit as a sign of weakness?
I do not.
Okay. Are you aware of additional cabinet members that you were emailing with that they were able to access your emails from?
As you know, Senator, this is an active investigation, so I don't want to go into that in this public forum.
Obviously, this is concerning, right?
No doubt. The hack was concerning. It was unacceptable. I brought it up when I was there. It's more than concerning.
The Department of Commerce allocated Washington, D.C. more than $547,000 per unserved location. 33% of those locations are at the National Zoo. This is a waste of taxpayer money. I think that most taxpayers would be horrified by the prospect of spending upwards of $100,000 or $200,000 to connect a single location, especially when many of these homes could be connected by an alternative or innovative technologies at an exponentially lower cost to the taxpayer. So question, would it be better for taxpayers to spend $200,000 on a fiber connection to a single home that's worth $50,000? That's $200,000 to connect it, that's the connection fee and cost, to a home worth $50,000? Or would it be better to spend $500 connecting that house to a high-speed satellite?
Thank you, Senator, for your question. First, I want to say the statute provides for
Let's just go back. Thank you for the elaboration. I know it's end of the day, but if you could just answer, is it better to spend $200,000 on a $50,000 house, or is it better to spend $500 connecting it to satellite?
It depends on the quality.
So you're saying it might be worth spending $200,000 of everyone's taxpayer money to connect to a $50,000 house when you could do it for $500?
Well,
did I hear that correctly, madam?
First of all, this isn't my decision. Your governor and your state will provide a plan. Our job is to make sure that at the end of that plan, every single North Carolinian, regardless of where they live, has high quality, affordable
I appreciate
internet.
that, but I don't think spending $200,000
doesn't help
because
anyone.
here's what's happening. Let me get to the point. Thank you, madam. Would it be worthwhile? And because here's what's actually happening. Would it be worthwhile for taxpayers to spend $200,000 on a fiber connection to a mansion that's worth $5 million?
Nobody says fiber has to be used. And I doubt the mansion
Well, there seems to be a
unconnected.
bias towards fiber. That's what's happening. It's happening right now because the Biden administration, it has shunned wireless and satellite alternatives. Further, Biden BEAD rules allow taxpayer subsidies to go towards building fiber to mansions and vacation homes. These rules prohibit states from funding non-fiber projects except in extreme situations. Now, these are extreme situations which you may have begun to elaborate on, but unless they get a waiver from the federal government.
Secretary, I want to talk a little bit about your trip to China. Did you think it was a success?
It was a productive trip, certainly.
Were you able to hold them to account?
I was clear that there'll be no negotiation on anything related to national security or export controls.
And did you call them out about committing genocide against the Uyghur Muslims?
I did.
And their response?
I didn't get much of a response.
Okay. And have you visited Taiwan?
I have not.
Any reason for that?
I have had no reason to visit Taiwan.
No reason to visit Taiwan? And even though they're a primary supplier of a lot of chips, do you consider Taiwan a country?
The administration's policy is clear on Taiwan, and
So you're not going to deviate from that?
absolutely not.
Okay.
How does this administration, with you as their representative, actually square exempting one industry over another when it's holding up progress in all of national security, energy security, communication, everything? Why would that be a good idea, and how can this administration think that's a good idea?
I can only speak to chips, and what I said earlier was, sometimes these processes could take, 10 years or
Right,
years.
right.
And each of these would be, for chips, it's a national security imperative. So what we are doing, but of course, I want to be crystal clear, we have to maintain basic environmental protections, and we will, as we build out these manufacturing facilities. We are not looking to get rid of environmental protections. We are just looking to have a more streamlined process.
Okay,
so
we
can
agree
move
on that.
more
I'm not
quickly.
into eliminating environmental protections. But the length of all these projects, I would say to you, energy security is just as important as chip security. I would say transmission in this country is just as important as something that does the manufacturing chips. And then if you're going to manufacture the chips, you've got to mine them and recover them. And that means you have to permit the mine. If you look at arsenic, which is used in chips, 97% of that is from China. If you look at cobalt, 70% of that is from China. Rare earth elements, 60% of that is from China, 10% from the United States. Titanium, 86% from Japan. Noble gases are from Russia and Ukraine. But we have these resources in this country, but we can't get these mines to permit. So how are you going to go from permitting the fab when you can't get the materials permitted? There's a disconnect here. And, you know, I would be fine to try to work this disconnect out because as I said in the beginning, I think this is exceedingly important for our future.
Yeah. Look, as you say, this is complicated and there is a balance. I know that the chair, in a bipartisan way, has worked on an amendment in the NDAA as it relates to chips. I'm in no way saying that these other issues aren't also important and they, you know, merit further discussion.
I just think it's rather ironic that an administration would actually make an exception for something they consider a marquee plan for them, albeit in the best interest of the country, when there's these other things that I think politically are more difficult to touch, that they wouldn't look for the streamlining of permitting, which should be fair and even across the board.